So, before we go on any skydive, we're going to do a pre-jump gear check, and we're going to check all the aspects of this parachute and its system. The first thing we're going to check is the AAD, the Automated Activation Device. This computer system is built into the deployment system of the reserve parachute, and through air pressure it knows our speed and our altitude, and should it decide we're at an altitude too low, at a speed too high, it's going to automatically activate our reserve deployment. So before we put any rig on or check anything else, I'm going to make sure the AAD is switched on and it's set to the setting we want. It says 0 on the screen, which means it's turned on and it knows that this is ground level. Once I've checked that, I'm going to go to the beginning of the parachute system. The first piece of this system I'm going to use is the main parachute deployment, which is my throwaway pilot chute handle here. I'm checking that the handle's there available when I need it, but the rest of the pilot chute is packed neatly into its pocket. I'm then going to open the main pin flap. I'm checking that the pin is seated fully into the closing loop. The closing loop is frayed and not damaged, and the bridle is routed correctly from the pilot chute pocket to the pin over the top here, and the Velcro is seated onto the Velcro in the container. Once I've checked the pins in place and how I want it to be, I'm going to close the main pin flap to protect that. Coming up to the top of the parachute system, we have the reserve parachute packed in here. Through the display window, I can check the reserve pin is seated fully into its loop. The loop is not damaged and the pin is straight. Also on here, we have a small tag with a date on it. The parachute technician who's specifically qualified to inspect and pack our reserve parachutes has dated when they've last inspected and packed it, so we know it's within the correct date and we can use it. Moving over the top of the parachute harness here, I'm going to check our 3-ring release system. And this is the release system that's going to activate should we need to pull our cutaway handle and cut away from a malfunctioning parachute. This is a tension relieving system. So to make sure that it's going to work in correct order, I need to make sure only one component passes through the next. To remember that, I've got a nice little rhyme. I've got a big ring, middle ring, little ring, piece of string, and the yellow thing. The yellow thing is the Teflon cable, which is attached to the cutaway handle here on the front of the harness. On the other side, I'm checking the same thing. Big ring, middle ring, little ring, piece of string, and the yellow thing, my cutaway cable. I can spin the middle and the little ring freely because there's no tension held within this system. Attached to this side of the riser, I have the reserve static line. This is attached here to the main riser, and then it's housed over the top of the container, and then is attached to the cable on the reserve pin here. In a situation where we cut away from a malfunctioning parachute, the backup device, reserve static line, is going to try and beat us to deploying the reserve handle. But we're all trained to use our handles in the correct order in the correct timing. So as any other backup device, we're never going to rely on it. But we are going to check that it's in place and there if we need it. Coming down the front of the harness, I'm checking that my cutaway handle, located on the right-hand side of the harness, is seated into its Velcro housing and is there available should I need it. On the left-hand side, I have my reserve handle. This D-ring here is connected to the reserve cable, which comes up over the container to the reserve pin that I've already inspected. I'm checking that the handle is Velcroed securely into its housing, and I want to see some excess on the reserve cable here. The reasons I want to see excess here is for flexibility in the harness. When we're wearing the harness, we don't want any unintentional tension on that reserve pin. Also, with that little bit of excess there, it means when we activate the reserve handle, we have that much momentum before we pull the reserve pin, meaning it's going to release in a much faster and safer manner. I'm also checking for the nib attached to the end of the reserve cable, making sure that when I pull it, it's going to activate with its handle. The rest of the harness I want to make sure is in good condition. The yellow stitching around all of the webbing here is what's going to remind us that this harness is in perfectly good order. I'm checking yellow stitching on any of the webbing, and I'm just checking general condition of the rest of the harness. I'm checking that the buckles, I can tighten them, but with tension on them, they're not going to loosen. I can check that with both leg straps, and I can also check that with my chest strap across the front of the harness here. Once I've carried out a full pre-jump gear check, we now know that this parachute is in good working order and is ready to be taken into free fall.